Hello would-be potters. We were making flower pots the last time I saw you, and what a successful project that was. I had so many flower pots made in every which way. The lovely thing about the project was that everybody had to find their own flower pot to make a flower pot in, and so I had all kinds of extraordinary and exciting pieces. The great thing about the now is that we have so many flowers we can pop into those flower pots, and indeed the garden centres are open. So if you're brave enough to go to the garden centre, you can fill your basket with flowers for your flower pots. In fact, you probably need to make a few more. If you recall, we made our first flower pot in this, and it's amazing to see the finished product, which is so much smaller. Not only by making the flower pot inside of a pot does it become smaller, but the fact that the clay shrinks by at least 10% makes it smaller again. I'm really happy with this one. This one's got a really deep red look and almost burnt orange, and it's sturdy and it's frost-proof and it's everything I need it to be. The flowers are a little bit moth-beaten, but they were the ones that were in my greenhouse, not the ones that I bought from any garden centre, because indeed I haven't been out at all. This one here was the one done with coils. Do you remember the coily swirly one? Just a little tiny one. And that was very popular with quite a few people. My favourite of all was this pot. Do you recall? It was broken. I taped it together and then I made another pot inside it. It's a very old Victorian pot and I absolutely adore it. I was devastated when it was broken. This pot that I made as a result is stunning. I am so happy with that. It's a beautiful shape. It's strong. It should last a lifetime. And the flowers set it off. And there's nothing better than making a pot and then potting it up. I think that the combination of both processes give you a really good feel-good factor. So that's my favourite pot at the moment. I'll pop it down here. And I considered what you might like to make next. And having realised that all very keen gardeners as well as potters, I suggested to myself that making something else for the garden would be a good idea. So we're going to make another pot, if you didn't hear that. But this time we're going to cut it in half and we're going to make it so that it will go on the wall. This is one that I made a long time ago. I threw a round pot with a fluted base and then I cut it in half to make it into a wall pot. And these have been very, very popular. However, you haven't got a wheel at home and you're not likely to throw. So I've had to come up with something that you can do. I've come up with a wall pot that you can make using a flower pot. Here's a very simple one. This is my first one that I did. Okay, it's still drying out. It's terracotta clay. We know it'll go a lovely burnt orange, and it's got some fixing points and a little decoration. It's really, really very simple. All you need to do is remember how to make your pot in the first place. So the pot that I have here was made in this pot here, but it could be made in something like this. Either would do. And once the pot is made, and you know how to do that because you did it in the last video, it's taken out and then it's cut in half to form into a wall pot. If you don't remember how to make the pot in the first instance, perhaps we should take another look. I have in front of me an array of flower pots, which you probably recognise this one as the most traditional. It's the one that we're quite used to, a pot with a rim, a band around the top of it, made out of a red terracotta clay. So that's probably the one we're the most used to. This here is pretty much the same, but in fact there's a world of difference between the two. The first one I showed you has been made using liquid clay, and you wouldn't know that unless you knew a little bit about pottery. In fact, very few people know that a lot of things are made using liquid clay. Liquid clay is slip. It's poured into a mould, and then when it sets, the interior of the slip is poured out, leaving a shell around the outside, the inside. This has got a very smooth finish, and that's how we know that it's actually been made from a liquid clay. This pot here, conversely, is very, very rugged. It's got a lot of grog, it's got a lot of stones in it, and when we look inside, we can see that there are bands all the way up. And those bands suggest one of two things. It's either been thrown by a potter, although the very groggy clay would have made that a very painful thing to do, or it has been created by using a jigger jolly. Now, a jigger jolly is whereby a mould, again, is used. It's placed on an electric wheel, and as it goes round, a piece of clay is put inside it, and a handle comes down and makes a hole in the centre of the clay, and it's very much like a pot being thrown, except for there's nobody actually doing it with their hands. The clay moves out to the outside wall and it comes up and it's cut off the top. This is the kind of mould that you might expect the clay goes into, and then the jigger jolly comes down. It spins around and the clay goes onto the outside. We have also got a pot here which it's quite difficult to know how that one's been made. It could have been hand thrown, it could have been made with a jigger jolly, but it's probably made in Crete. We know that from the pale kind of terracotta. It's still a terracotta clay, but it's quite a pale one, and it's got sort of the types of patterns that you might see on those kind of pots. I've got here a pot which has got a lot of tape around it because I broke it, and that made me very sad because this is an absolutely beautiful pot. And in fact, when we look inside it, we can see that it has been hand thrown. We can see all the finger marks that have come up the side. It's been done very, very beautifully and very, very carefully. It's fluted so that it comes out at the top, and the rim has been split to create a lovely pattern. And I'm so upset that that one's been broken that I think I would like to make one like that. However, you don't have a pot like that at home, and the reason we're looking very closely at these flower pots is because we're going to use them, or one of them, to make our flower pot in. Yes, you could take coils of sausages, and you could build up pots which then become flower pots, but that's a really long and hard way of creating what you'll actually need quite a few of if you've been growing as many seeds as I have. So what you need to do, because you don't have a mould that you can work into and you don't have a jigger jolly, those are my two moulds there, what you have to do is take a look at the pots you've got at home. This is a really old Victorian one, and it's been made so carefully, it's so fine, and it's a little bit too small to work in because it's so tight inside, so I won't be using that. This one, conversely, is very wide, so it's a very simple one to work in. It's got a very smooth finish. Again, this is one of our slip pots, a cast pot made with liquid clay. And this one is the very traditional one that I showed you before, which would make a good mould. When I want a mould, I want it to be able to release the flower pot from it. So when I'm searching for my ideal mould, it's got to be simple to get my hands inside, and it's got to be wide enough for and opening with no sort of undercut so that the pot's going to pop out after. What do I mean by undercut? Well, you might imagine that this pot would be suitable because it's wide, it goes out. But when you actually feel inside it, you realise that it curves inwards. And because of that curve inwards, if I built something inside of it and then I tipped it out, it would be trapped in that curve. So carefully select a flower pot from the vast array of pots that you've got at home, and make sure that it's A, not too big, you want to start small, and B, that it's got sloping sides inside, so whatever you make inside will pop out. Let me show you how we can do this. So the pot that I have chosen to work with, and I'll just put this lovely one away. The pot pot that I have chosen to work with, it's not this one, which I would really like. It's got a hole at the side, synonymous with the Victorian type of pots, which lets the water out. But a thicker, stumpier one, like this. It's going to make a perfect mould because it's really heavy duty, and that means that it's not going to fall over when I'm working into it. However, having said that, these pots are perfectly fine. Now, the wonderful thing about working in these flower pots is that the clay is porous, and because it's porous, it will suck the water out of your clay, but your clay won't stick to the pots. So long as your pot has got no glaze inside, then the water will be dragged out of the clay that you put in there, and as it dries out and the clay shrinks, it will easily pop out. Couldn't be simpler. Now, by now you should know how to roll a piece of clay out, so I'm not going to show you again. However, it's really important to remember that the thickness of the clay depends on what you're going to be making, and we're making something that we need to be sturdy. So it's ideal, therefore, if we use sticks or guides which are thick enough. 1 centimetre thick should be fine. Something like that. Placemats either side, pile them up until you get them the right thickness to roll the clay out between. On the table, I have got a sheet of terracotta, that's red clay, which I've rolled out. I've rolled it out between two guides, which are reasonably thick. The first thing that I've got to do is to work out how big the base should be. To do that, I place the pot onto the clay and then cut around the outside. We're going to be putting the clay inside this pot. So we know that by cutting the circle, which is the exterior, the base, that is going to be plenty big enough. There we go. Next thing we do is place that inside the pot, press it down, and it will just come up the sides a little bit. I'll show you in a minute when I just press it down. Now, the reason it's useful having the bits coming up the side is because that's what we're going to stick the sides to. Okay? So this clay is relatively thick and nice and soft. What we need to do now is work out how much clay we need for inside, and a piece of A4 paper is very useful. You can place it inside, roll it up like that, and then expand it, and you can see that we need it about the height of the width of the A4 paper, and that if we have that much clay, we've got enough to make half of the pot. We'll either do this in 2 or 3 pieces. It doesn't matter which. I'm going to place my paper onto the clay. It's not big enough anymore because I've just taken a chunk out from my base. Get another piece I rolled out earlier. Place the paper on top of the clay, and it's about the size I'm going to need. You can cut with a knife or a pin, it really doesn't matter which. Now what I do next, if I put this up here, is to roll the clay up like this so that I can get it inside easily, and it goes right into the centre of the pot. Then I open it up and I press my hand down the centre to press it against the pot. And then when I get to the base, I'll show you in a second, I've got to press my fingers against the little bit of circle that came up the side and make sure that it's stuck. And when I've done that, press the rest of the clay down, like so. Okay. It's a good idea at this point to use a metal kidney we have metal ones, we have rubber ones, we have credit cards, and they're all useful for different jobs, but the one we want at the moment is a metal one. And push the clay into your pot as firmly as you can. I'll just turn this around for a minute so I can see what I'm doing. At the bottom, I've got to press really hard to get the clay in. Okay, so it's really quite firmly adhered. So if I stand it up here, I've got a little bit of clay that's not straight here. It's sort of like at an angle. So what I'm going to do is just cut that corner off. So I've got a nice straight line there. Now what I need is another piece of clay. I put my paper inside and work out how big I need it. But it's, you know, it doesn't really matter. It's about this size. And then using a pin or a knife, you can damage the pins sometimes with cutting, so perhaps a knife's better. Just grab this second piece of clay. It's not as difficult as it looks. And roll it in. Roll it in like that. Put it to the base, open it up. Put your hand in, and I'm really pushing against the bottom where the clay's rolling up the side. Having done that, I'm pressing all of the clay against the pot. Now what I do have is a very large overlap. It's really important that you don't have masses of clay overlapped. So if we take a piece of clay like this, to demonstrate this, what I'm having happen inside the pot is one layer is going over the other, and it's only just going over the top. It is not completely over the top with a really thick band of clay. So what I do is I peel back the second layer inside, and I work out exactly where I need to cut it so the seam is just a very narrow overlap. Press your finger into the seam all the way up on both sides. I've managed to do this in 2 pieces, which is pretty good. You can see why you need the pot to be nice and wide so you can get your hand inside. And then a metal kidney or a credit card will do inside, and smoothing the clay. And press hard and get it onto the mould. Now, any bits of clay, pull off your kidney. Don't work with a really dirty kidney. Keep cleaning it and keep working the clay in. And you will get the seam joined. There's no need for any slurry, no sticking with scoring and all that stuff. Just nice soft clay that I will let you have. And lots of hard scraping and getting it all nice and flush. It's not really difficult. And look how quick it is. If this was a coil pot, you'd be here forever. When you've done that, you need to cut the top. Simply run your knife around that. You might have a cake stand. It doesn't matter. Maybe you've got nothing that moves, but if you put it on top of a bucket, on a piece of wood or a mat, you can shimmy it around. I've cut it flush. I'm now going to use my knife on it. And basically, that's done. Obviously, if I had a bit more time, I don't want to waste time while I'm talking to you, fiddling around, I could get it really perfect. Now what happens is that this dries, and as it dries, it shrinks a little. It's a good idea to get your hands around the top and just pull the top slightly away from the edge if you can. Push it with your fingers like that. That's quite a good way. If you can't, don't worry. But if you can, it just breaks the seal that you've created with your knife. Don't get a sponge and sponge it, because you might get it nice and smooth, but you will get it sealed against the pot, and then as it dries, it will crack. So just a loose fitting for now. And we'll leave that to get firmer. Luckily, I made one earlier. Let's have a look at that. So I have now tipped my pot out of the flower pot, and look, it's quite firm. It's not brittle. It's still a little hard. It's got moisture inside it, so I can still work on it. If it's gone too hard, you can't work on it. Now that's nice and smooth, but look, we've got the places where the seams, where the clay was overlapped, and they have to be filled. So place your pot upside down, and then take some very soft clay, and you don't need lots. People make the mistake of putting far too much clay on their seams, and just feed it on like that. Then a MasterCard or a kidney is used to smooth the clay. And you've got 2 seams, or maybe 3 if you've done yours in 3 pieces. So that's not going to take very long. In fact, to be frank, this is a very, very quick way to make a flower pot. Keep cleaning the clay off. You can see how firm the pot is, but it is not dry at all. It is not brittle. I put it outside in the shade to dry. Had I put it outside in the sun would probably have cracked it. But the shade sort of lets it warm up, but doesn't dry it too quickly. So lots of little sausages. Did you see how quickly I made the sausage? The longer you take to make the sausage, then the more likely the clay is to crack. And that's because your hands are warm, and the moisture will be absorbed from the clay into your hands, and the clay will just crack. So very, very quickly make your coils and fill in your holes like that. I have to say, this credit card's working really well, and you can't use your credit card at the moment in the shop, so it's probably the best use of it. When you've done that, you've got every last bit of clay scooped in. Then you need to tidy up the surface of your pot with another kidney, but not a metal one and not a credit card one, a rubber one, like this, a bendy one. Dip it in some water, and then just smooth over the surface of the clay like so, and you'll soon get a really, really lovely finish. People often ask, why do we have to have a rubber kidney and a metal kidney? And that's basically because they've got 2 completely different jobs. One scrapes and one smooths. And on that note, I'm going to use the scrapey one, clean it off, to get a nice corner on the base. There's a tendency for this to be a rounded pot at the base, and we don't want it rounded, we want it nice and sharp. So you can really work on this, working on the outside, working on the inside, outside, inside, outside, inside, until you've got a nice sharp edge. You can use a sponge, and you can sponge it. Got a squeaky wheel. And there we go. That really didn't take very long to make. And the great thing about it is that I made it inside a flower pot. I didn't need to use a mould. Got to cut a hole in the base. You don't have to have it in the base. You could have it in the side like the early Victorian ones. I quite like them in the side. But there's a little mark on this part where there was a hole in the original one. So I've got a perfect circle, which I've cut out. And of course you know that if you don't cut a hole out of the bottom of your flower pot, then all of your pots, all of your seeds, all of your plants will get waterlogged. So that's really essential. Let's turn it up the right way. There we go. So now we can pay some attention to the rim. Let's tidy it up, see what we can do. Okay, so the original pot that I showed you looked like this. It's got a lovely broad band at the top, and then it's got a band here. There are all kinds of ways that you can decorate your pot. You could leave it simply as it is. Your flowers alone are going to look beautiful inside it. However, I'm going to show you how you can make some additions. So, I have got a mould here for a lovely pattern which will go around the top. I'm going to show you how I would use that. Don't worry that you don't have one. I'll come up with other ways for you to achieve this, even though you don't have a mould. Okay, so first of all, I've got some lovely soft clay, and I've cut a strip, and I place the clay onto the mould, and then I press with my thumb into the mould like this. It's made of plaster of Paris. The original was probably made from wood, I think. I didn't make it. Anushka made this. Anushka loves gardening and she loves flower pots, and she made lots of moulds. She was a student of mine, and she kindly gave them to me when she didn't have enough space for them all and she wanted to move on to ceramic jewellery. So press the clay in. Once you've got the clay really pressed in firmly, you can take a wire and pull it across the top. Remove the clay, and then all you need to do is to pop a bit of clay onto the strip and pull it back. It's really very clever. And there we go. We have a really lovely pattern that can go onto the pot. Before I put it onto the pot, I'm going to trim it. So I'll just get my piece of paper, place it on there. Needs a bit of trimming, so I can cut along here. And then what I've got to do on here is to score around the top where my addition is going to go, all the way round. You can do this with a pin or a serrated kidney. Okay, it's got some little tiny cuts in it. Now I'm going to take a piece of clay with the pattern on, put it on my hand, pop the slurry on. It's my glue, it's my yoo-hoo. Place it on the rim like that. It's really very simple. Push it up to the top, and hey presto, a beautifully decorated top, which makes it look as though hours have been spent carving, but in fact they have not indeed. Moulds are very useful. You can't frown about a mould and go, but it's, you know, it's a mould, if you've made the mould yourself. So there you go. And you can use moulds, all kinds of moulds, in very effective ways. So I quite like that. It's not the same as the original. I need to join another piece, and I'll show you very, very quickly how that happens with a very small bit. I'm not going to work all the way around, because if I do that, we'll be here all day. So just pop the small piece in, draw it back. This is just to show you how I would join it. So to join, what I do is I place one bit of mould over the top of the other, like that. And then I take a pin and I cut through the top layer and the next layer. And as I do that, I create the perfect cut underneath to place the top piece over like that. And once that's all worked in, you won't even know the join is there. But of course you don't have one of these, so what can you do? Well, if you look in your toolbox, you'll find that there are all kinds of things that you can use. This is quite useful. It's a scoop, usually used for hollowing out clay, but it can always be used in a very decorative way. If you run it through the clay, like that, press hard down, what you have is a beautiful, rounded, and yet flat at the back piece. So if I just tidy up the outside edge, that could go, smooth this round too. There we go. I think that could go on there. So if I was going to put on this on here, I would score and slurry, mark where it was going to go and stick it on. And you know how to layer one piece over the top of the one underneath, cut through with a pin so that you can get the right angle for joining pieces, and you'll never know where the seams are. So I think that would be rather nice. Luckily, I finished one off earlier. Let's take a look at it. That's if I can find it. Here it is. Not quite the same as the one I've just shown you, but very similar to the original, which is still down here. Not exactly the same, and obviously it's been made inside the pot, so it's going to be smaller. I put a little stamp on the back with my initials on, but also the stamp shows you how you could actually work into that seam and create a pattern. So I'm quite pleased with that. Do you remember I showed you this pot, which I was very, very sad to have broken? Well, I had a go at making that one too. I simply cut the base round the outside, as I said before, and here, too big, fitted it inside, it rolled up the edges, and then I put in 3 bands of clay and smoothed it down very gently, very carefully. And it worked very well, and it fell out very easily, and I'm very pleased with this indeed. So if you look around at all of the pots that you've got at home and all the different shapes, so long as you're very careful not to choose a pot which actually doesn't go like that, it goes in like that and you haven't noticed, so your pot won't fall out. As long as you're very careful, you'll be able to achieve this. There's one last thing I want to show you though before we go. Maybe you want to work in a pot like this. Okay, and maybe you'd like to know another way that you could achieve your goal. I've got a clean one here. That one's full of soil. There you go. So again, because it's porous, the clay will let you release anything that you build inside. If you try to cover your pot with clay, it will shrink onto the pot and split, so that won't work. I've got some clay I rolled out earlier, which is actually a little bit firmer than the soft clay. And because I enjoy using this tool so much, I thought it'd be rather nice to make a coily pot. This pot is made by creating coils of clay like this in abundance, and that's very easy to do when all you've got to do is to run your clay tool through the clay to make a coil, a flat-sided coil, okay, like that. There are different shaped edges on different scoops. So do try running different things through the clay and see what happens when you roll it up. I'm showing you this because it was one of my grandma's favourite techniques when she used to come to the pottery with me. She would make lots of flower pots and she always loved that technique. So if you remember, we have a round piece of clay that goes up the side. I'm doing a cross section, just a little tiny part of this pot. You put your base in first. It's a circle, curls up at the side. You take your coils and you place them into your pot, like that. You put them next to each other and you slowly fill the pot. And the coils are so easy to make because you're using this tool, so it's a very, very quick method. You've let your clay get a little bit firmer, so that when you then get some soft clay and place it all over the back of those coils so that you can't see the twists, and you work it in, it easily pushes into the clay, into the coils without damaging them. So without, pressing them out of existence. So you can work inside your pot until you've completely filled it with these coils. And then you put your soft clay over the top and you smooth it all in. And hey presto, luckily, somewhere I've got one I made earlier. When you drop it out, it looks like that. It's really quick, it's really simple, and you can make lots of pots like that. In fact, simply by placing clay into your pot, even in smaller pieces, and smoothing it together, you can make a flower pot. You don't have to do it in 2 pieces or large pieces or overlay. You can just roll a flat piece of clay out, rip it into pieces, put it inside, smooth it all together. You will have, when you tip it out, more holes to fill in if you haven't done the curly pattern, but it's really very simple. Okay, so there's 2 ideas for you. But you know what? At the end of this, what you'll realise is that you've got quite a lot of clay rolled out that's left over. And if that's the case, why not make yourself some labels for your pots so that you know what's inside them. This one's got onions in. I don't know if you can see that, but they're very simple to do. The big mistake people make is by not rolling the clay out thick enough. So it needs to be at least a centimetre thick, and not making them big enough. They do need to be quite big because you're going to bury them into your pots or into your garden and you won't see them otherwise. To do the writing is very simple. Let's take a look at how we might do that. Simply take your already shaped stake, print yourself off the word that you want on top. Let's say I want onions on this one, and then take a pencil, a sharp pencil, and press quite firmly into the clay. Okay, let's just take a look at the O. You can see it's just about there. And then all you've got to do is to scrape out that O. Now, you can do it, it'll take a while, but the best thing to do is to actually wait until the clay is really quite firm. And what I've also found is that you can fashion a smaller tool with a wire. I can put a wire in your parcel and you can use that to scrape out a letter if your tool is just too big. And that's quite useful. And of course, actually, if you think about it, you could fashion this into all kinds of shapes and then drag it through the clay and see what pattern you get. I'm also going to put you one of these in so that you can take it and just scoop out your letters with that too. So that's a start. We've got to know, but we do know that we can achieve that. They're very useful. And when this clay is fired, just in case you're not sure, it will go a deep red like this. This is a plaque I made for the house. Unfortunately, I put something on top of it when I fired it and it cracked. You can see the mark of the pot I placed on top. Bad move. But look, the letters have all been carved out and that's a rounded letter. I hope you've enjoyed watching that. I'm really looking forward to seeing your pots because there are so many different ways you can do this. You can use your own garden pots, your own shapes. You need to be careful. You can create quite large ones, but don't go too mad. And so now you remember how to make the flower pot, don't you? And you've already done it before, so it shouldn't be that difficult. Here's the flower pot I made earlier, using the same technique as described in the video, how to make a garden pot. We've just gone over it. When you've made your pot, you need to tip it out of the flower pot. And instead of that being the end, it's really the beginning of your new pot. If you remember, we're making a pot which will go onto the wall. It's got a flat back, it's got holes in the base so that it drains water, and the flowers will go into the front here. I took the pot and simply divided it in half so that I had half. You can see that the clay is quite firm. It hasn't gone brittle, it hasn't dried out so much that it will break. It still retains a lot of moisture, but when I move it around, it holds its form, and that's very important. I have scored all of the edge of this pot. In fact, I've even decorated it already and chopped away at the rim. You can do that now, or you can do it right at the end. I've also rolled another piece of clay out. Now this piece of clay is a little bit thicker than you might imagine. If I look at my sticks, they've got written on them that they are not the flat ones, which are a bit thinner, but the square ones. And the depth of this is 1 centimetre. And the reason that we need the back to be thicker is we need it to be strong. So roll your clay out, and you do know how to do that, until it is 1 centimetre thick by putting guides either side of the clay. And if you haven't got guides, then build something up either side of the clay that the rolling pin can lean on, usually table mats. Okay, so what we're going to do is now place the pot onto here and to mark out where it's going to go. And to do that, we need a pin or a knife. Now it's really very, very simple. Notice that I have not worried about the top yet. I'm going to score all the way up here. All the way along here. And of course, all these pots will be slightly different depending on the flower pot that you've used to make your pot with. Don't make them too big. They're only going to go on the wall. Next, I need slurry, which I have here in a pot. And that needs to go on very, very thickly, like this. Don't push it into all the holes and the lines, just build it up so that you've got plenty of slurry for this pot to stick to. Now, because this is a lot firmer, you can see by the way I picked it up, it's not wobbly at all. I need to make sure that this scored edge is also very, very moist. The problem we have if we do not put enough slurry on is that later on it will crack off. Might not crack off now, it'll crack as it dries. Place your pot on top and give it a wobble. Now you've noticed I haven't cut the shape out. I haven't cut it out because you can guarantee if you cut it out when you go to put the flower pot on top, it doesn't fit somehow. So I've placed that on, and the next thing I need to do is to cut around the base, for which I need a knife. It's over there. Knife. Place this behind here so that you can see. And I'm going to cut very, very firmly. When I get to the top, I'm going to just lean out so that the clay goes out that way. I'm going to cut. It's hard cutting this way. I'd normally do it flat on the table, like that. And then cut around the base. Okay, having done that, I require a sponge, just to sponge it down. And it would be lovely to think that that would be enough, but in fact it's not. You can guarantee that that will come off, even if I get my sponge inside and sponge it, that'll come off unless I secure it. And securing is done with a coil. Do you remember? And coils are something that you roll very quickly. In fact, if you've got a bit of water on your hand, it doesn't matter. It stops the coil from cracking. Now you're going to place the coil inside. I can't see what I'm doing, but I can feel where the edge is. And you're going to press it down all the way up. And then it's a nice soft coil, not squidgy, but soft enough. I'm going to push it in with my finger until I can feel that it's not a coil anymore. It's just blended into the crack all the way to the top. Another one on the other side. I think what you get to understand with all of these processes is the value of the clay being really, really hard or really, really soft, depending on what job you're doing. You want the clay to be firm to keep shape with the pot, but it must be soft to work into the crack. Otherwise, as you try to push it in, then it just distorts everything. And it's a good feely job. You're going to have to just imagine and try to work out what you've done. And then finally, along the bottom. Along the bottom, of course, we've got a little drainage hole, so don't block that up. And squidge it all in. Don't really need to be desperately tidy because it's going to be full of soil. I'm going to have a look and see how I've done. Oh yes, very nice. It's a good idea for the top not to be too tall, because this piece here is going to have a lot of tension that's different to this area, which has got a building on top of it, and it might crack. Therefore, I've got a piece of paper. Here's a piece of paper which I'm going to lie across the top of it. Okay, like that. I'm also going to take a ruler. In fact, I'll take the ruler first and work out that it's 18 across, so that's 9 for the middle, like that. Take my piece of paper on there, mark where the middle is, and fold it over like that. And then I've got a shape that I can make a template out of. And I think the back should basically only be about that high. But by drawing it on paper and folding it in half, I've got a symmetrical shape, and I can place that one here and I can see if it's going to be right. I think that's probably okay. Let's hold it up this way. Okay. So the next thing to do is to cut the top edge like that. Okay, and then bring the side up to the top gently. Simples. It's very important to make sure that this is where it doesn't crack and this is where it will crack. So pop a ball there and smooth it in. Pop it down the edges and really work it into the clay. When you've worked it into the clay, you can then take the sponge and smooth it in. And you can spend a lot more time on this than I have. Sponge across the top, like that. This is a very important part of the flower pot because it's where it's going to take the weight, and it's also going to have some holes very close, so it needs to be well supported. Let's have a look at that. Okay, and now what I need to do is put the holes in. Now the holes are quite important. First of all, pick it up, give it a good firm, sponge it over. And then when you put the holes in, maybe if you look at the back or sideways, maybe that way, you can sort of, I always do it by eye, but I suppose I should tell you how to do it by measuring. There's 4 centimetres in either way. And push your knife through, twist it round, push your knife through, twist it round. It's quite messy at the front. So what we need to do is just cut off the clay which has come through the hole like that. Now the worst thing, of course, is the hole that's not big enough, and these are for the screws. So I usually put in a pencil and make it even wider like that. Okay. Okay, so those are the holes which you can put screws onto the wall and it can just sit on top of. The one I made earlier, I had time to fiddle with, and in fact I made a little shape going out. The one thing you've got to be sure not to do is to put your holes too close to the edge. They really need to be quite a way in from the edge, because if there's only a small gap between the hole and the edges, it will crack. Okay, so be really careful about that. And now we have a pot that can go on the wall and be filled with flowers. But it isn't exactly the same as the one that I made earlier, which is wide. And so I suggest to you that if you chose a different flower pot, one like, so this pot is wider, and if you think about it, you can get more flowers into it really. But the best thing about this flower pot is that it's really easy to put the clay into. So remember the video we had to go back over about how to put the clay in to make the flower pot. You can't make it all in one go. You can't just put one piece of clay in, but you can probably get away with 2, which makes it very easy. I made it a while ago, so it's already gone hard and firm. And I thought I'd show you from the point at which we cut it. First of all, you need to work out where that line is, and the best way to do that is to pop a piece of paper underneath it. See how firm it is still? Draw around that piece of paper. Draw around that piece of paper, and then when you've done that, what you can do is to fold the piece of paper in half like that. And that is a very easy way of working out where to put your line if you marry up where the half is. The other thing you could do is put a piece of string all the way round and then fold it in half and see where the halfway line is. I've then taken a ruler and placed it where that marker is, where that line is, that's the halfway mark, and just drawn a straight line and then just literally followed it up and across. And the same the other side. Having done that, my pot is ready to cut. So using a sharpish knife, I'm cutting from the centre down. It's gone a little bit harder than I would have liked, but I think we can get away with it. We'll soon know. If we can't, it will crack. If your clay does go really hard, it's a good idea to use something, not a Stanley knife, but a knife that's similarly thin that can cut. And hey presto, we've got a different shape. So what we need now, pop that one there, is another piece of clay. Remember, the clay is 1 centimetre thick, thicker than we'd normally roll it out. And just as we did with the other pot, we place it onto the clay and mark where it goes. If we can find a knife. Goes there like that. Okay. And then we need to score just as we did with the other one. First one way, then another way. I know you know how to do this, but sometimes it's good to watch it more than once to consolidate. And then here again. There we go, good scoring. I've got them some slurry that's a little bit thicker over here, which is some nicely slapped down clay, and I'm really piling it on. Like that. That's that one done. See how firm it is? It's not flippy flopping about. Don't let it go too hard, else it won't stick. And of course it'll look like it sticks, but you won't know until later when it all falls apart that it hasn't. That's going to go on there like that. I usually give it a jiggle, and that creates a suction. And in fact, you can see that truck suction is enough to already lift up the clay like that. And then sponge to sponge away the slurry. Sleepy slurry, sponge it down there, sponge it at the sides, and then take your knife and you can cut. In fact, with something like this, it's a good idea to cut a little bit away. I'll show you in a minute at the side. And don't forget, you can use all these scraps to make your labels. We've got a lot of labels for the garden made last time. Can you see this one? It's got a little bit of an edge to it. And that edge really is quite nice. It just gives it a bit more width, and you can decorate it, which is rather good. So you're going to have to put a coil inside of this, as I showed you before on the other one. Won't bother to do that now because that would be too time consuming. Now if you remember, we placed the pot onto a piece of paper and cut out a circle, and that's really good because what you can do with the other half of the circle is cut out the top edge. And so I'm placing that now, it's really clever, against that, and you can see that I've already got the shape for the top where I'm going to work. So I'll just put it on a little bit more evenly. Place it on there. If I dab it on with a sponge, it will stay in place, and then I can card. Again, don't go up too tall. If you go up too tall, the stresses will cause the top to bend up, to warp up, or indeed to crack away from the base. But I think we can just about get away with that. That's quite a nice little shape. Okay. And the nice thing about this is that you could actually take some spare clay and do some quite decorative work by using a scoop. Just pull the scoop through like that. Do you remember we did this with the flower pots? And then you can use this to decorate the edge like that. You can twist it. And you can play with it at the edges, like so. And if I just take this one back and show you, the edges have got a fair amount of work on. And in fact, that strengthens, especially at the top, because right at the top, I don't know if you can see that, right at the top, here, the weight of all that pattern holds that piece that's going out, this bit here, down. With this one, I tend to put holes not just in the base, but occasionally in the side, like so. And then the water can just trickle out. So I'm not going to finish that off, because you know, to finish it off I've got to spend some time embellishing all around here, putting a coil inside to make sure that it's secure, it's not going to crack, putting another hole in the side, and putting 2 holes into the edges like these. There's 2 holes there so that it can hang up. Okay, and in fact this one has got holes down here. I think there is nothing like making flower pots. It's absolutely fabulous. But when you've got enough flower pots on the floor, it's really nice to put them on the wall. And we've all got plenty of outdoor wall spaces for our flower pots. Here's the one that we started with. Very simple one. You've all got this pot, this sort of a pot. And then we've moved on to the one which is wider, using this pot as a base. I hope you're going to enjoy making these pots, because there's nothing better than seeing what you bring in for me to fire, and even more wonderful when you post the photographs of your pots with flowers in. So get making and get growing. Have fun.